In a small European village called Brightwood, in the 1980s, lived a boy named Tommy. Tommy was 12 years old and loved solving mysteries. He wanted to be a detective when he grew up. He had a small room full of books about famous detectives, magnifying glasses, and notebooks where he wrote down clues. One day, as Tommy was walking home from school, he noticed something strange. The old clock in the village square, which had been broken for years, was ticking again. The clock had stopped at exactly 2:30, but now it showed 4:45 and was ticking away happily. The villagers were curious but thought someone had fixed it. Tommy, however, felt there was more to the story. Tommy decided to investigate. He went to see Mr. Baker, the village clockmaker, who was very old and had a workshop full of clocks. Tommy knocked on the door, and Mr. Baker opened it with a smile. "Hello, Tommy. What brings you here?" Mr. Baker asked. "Hello, Mr. Baker. I noticed the old clock in the square is working again. Did you fix it?" Tommy inquired. Mr. Baker shook his head. "No, Tommy. I haven't touched that clock in years. It's a mystery to me too." Tommy's curiosity grew. He thanked Mr. Baker and decided to look around the clock tower. The clock tower was a tall, stone building with a winding staircase leading to the top. Tommy had never been inside before. The door to the tower was usually locked, but today it was slightly ajar. Tommy pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of old wood and dust. He climbed the staircase slowly, listening to the creaking steps beneath his feet. When he reached the top, he saw the clock's machinery. It was old and covered in cobwebs, but it was working perfectly. Tommy looked closer and saw a piece of paper stuck in the gears. He carefully pulled it out and unfolded it. The paper was a letter. It read, "Dear friend, if you are reading this, you have discovered the secret of the old clock. Many years ago, I found a way to repair it, but I needed a special part. I hid the part in my house and left this note to guide you. Follow the clues, and you will find the part and solve the mystery of the clock. Good luck, A.H." Tommy was excited. He loved solving puzzles. The letter was signed with the initials A.H. Tommy tried to think of anyone in the village with those initials but couldn't recall anyone. He decided to check the village records. The village library had a small section with old records of everyone who had lived there. At the library, Tommy asked the librarian, Mrs. Green, for help. Mrs. Green was a kind woman who knew everything about the village. "Mrs. Green, do you know anyone with the initials A.H. who lived here a long time ago?" Tommy asked. Mrs. Green thought for a moment. "Ah, yes. There was a man named Arthur Halloway. He lived here many years ago. He was an inventor and a bit of a recluse. He lived in the old house by the river." Tommy knew the house. It was an old, abandoned place that people said was haunted. Tommy didn't believe in ghosts, so he decided to go there. He thanked Mrs. Green and hurried to the house by the river. The house was surrounded by overgrown bushes and tall grass. The windows were boarded up, and the door was locked. Tommy found a loose board and squeezed through a small opening. Inside, the house was dark and dusty. Tommy used his flashlight to look around. The furniture was covered with white sheets, and there were cobwebs everywhere. He remembered the letter and started looking for clues. On the fireplace mantel, he found an old photograph of a man standing next to the clock tower. The man had kind eyes and a gentle smile. Tommy guessed this was Arthur Halloway. Tommy searched the house for anything that might be the special part mentioned in the letter. In the attic, he found a box labeled "Clock Parts." Inside were gears, springs, and screws, but nothing seemed special. Then he noticed a small, velvet-lined box at the bottom. Inside was a shiny, golden key. Tommy felt a thrill of excitement. This had to be it. He took the key and went back to the clock tower. He climbed the stairs again and looked for a place where the key might fit. Behind the clock's face, he found a small keyhole. With a deep breath, Tommy inserted the key and turned it. The clock skipped, and a hidden compartment opened, revealing a tiny, intricate gear made of gold. Tommy carefully placed the golden gear into the clock's mechanism. The clock chimed loudly, and the hands moved to show the correct time. Tommy felt a sense of accomplishment. He had solved the mystery of the old clock. Word of Tommy's discovery spread through the village. The villagers were amazed and grateful. The old clock had been a beloved landmark, and now it was working again thanks to Tommy. They held a small celebration in his honor. Mr. Baker gave me a special magnifying glass as a gift, and Mrs. Green told everyone about Tommy's detective skills. Tommy felt proud but knew there was still one mystery left. Who had fixed the clock and left the letter? That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about Arthur Halloway. Maybe Mr. Halloway had wanted someone to find his secret and keep the clock running. Tommy decided to visit Mr. Halloway's grave the next day to pay his respects. The next morning, Tommy went to the village cemetery. He found Arthur Halloway's grave, which was well maintained. He placed a small flower on the grave and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Halloway." As he turned to leave, he saw an elderly man standing nearby. The man had kind eyes and a gentle smile, just like the photograph. The man nodded at Tommy and then slowly walked away, disappearing into the morning mist. Tommy felt a shiver run down his spine but also a sense of peace. He knew he had done something important. Tommy continued to solve mysteries in Brightwood, becoming the village's beloved detective. The old clock kept ticking, a reminder of the mystery he had solved and the legacy of Arthur Halloway. And every time the clock chimed, Tommy smiled, knowing he had made a difference. Years later, when Tommy grew up and became a famous detective, he always remembered the mystery of the old clock as his first big case. It taught him that every clue, no matter how small, is important and that sometimes, the past holds secrets that can change the future. And so, the old clock in Brightwood's village square kept ticking, marking the time and the memories of a young detective's first adventure.